actual last ever GP CCG strategic membership event. And this is a really, this is the end of an era and the beginning of a new era. So we're handing over the strategic membership meetings today from ourselves as the membership of the CCG to ourselves really as the GP collaborative. And we thought that this would really be a good opportunity to just reassure colleagues as to what the new landscape is going to look like and how things might operate the same or slightly differently. So it's the usual rules. Again, I would really encourage you to ask questions. If you've got questions, don't worry if you think it's something you should already know. If you don't know, ask the question. Bob it in the chat or pop your hand up. And obviously this will be winging its way to its usual home on Berry SharePoint once we have completed the webinar. So when I think back to the beginning of the CCG, we became a CCG in officially April 2013, and it feels like an awfully long time. Well, it is an awfully long time ago, but we actually really started in April 2012, Kieran, if you recall, and we had a whole year of busily preparing ourselves to be authorised, and we started work straight away, and it has provided a huge opportunity for primary care across the country to really have its voice heard, and that's what we really need to ensure we continue to allow to happen across the new architecture that we will be working in. And I think that there is absolutely every opportunity for us to do that, but it is going to be all of our responsibilities to actually play our part in that. And I think that what we're going to try and present today, what Will, Kieran, Kath and Zoe are going to present to us, is really how we feed in to the new architecture and how we represent our patients into the new system. So with no further ado, we will go straight to Will to give us a bit of an overview about what the new system looks like. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Kathy. Good afternoon, colleagues. Hope everyone's okay. I do appreciate how incredibly busy it is for the system and for primary care. So thanks for taking the time to join. Yeah, as Kathy says, I'll just give a kind of a brief background as to where we are in the journey to the new arrangements, and then perhaps a little bit of confidence. I hope that there's still lots of capacity, lots of opportunity, and lots of scope to ensure that GP leadership is the heart of the work in Berry. So just a bit of an update. So GM wide, what's happening? As just a bit of a refresh. So 1st of July, the CCG finishes. 30th of June, and along with 9 other CCGs in Greater Manchester, the duties are taken on by NHS Greater Manchester. The organisation NHS Greater Manchester, that's technically what is the ICB, is being assembled. As chair, Sir Richard Lees, a new chief executive, Mark Fisher, and a medical director, a GP from Rusholme, Dr. Manisha Kumar. That organisation is, as I say, the body that takes on responsibility for the CCGs and from staff previously at the Greater Manchester Health and Care Partnership, and it's one part of the wider GM integrated care system that includes a provider, trusts collaborative, the councils, voluntary sector, combined authority, and lots of others. Nearly all CCG staff will just transfer their employment to the new organisation on the 1st of the 7th, and this includes, of course, loads of people that you connect with on a regular basis, the primary care team, the meds optimisation team, the quality team, and others. And there's not intended to be any change to line management responsibilities from the 1st of July. This is a kind of a lift and shift process. So people who are doing work in Berry for the CCG on the 30th of June will continue to do the same sort of work in Berry on the 1st of July. Now, from there on, there may be some changes. You know, it will be a single organisation replacing 10 organisations. So there's bound to be some process of aggregation, some process of consistency, some process of commonality, but that will be a subject to consultation. And of course, we continue to be an important part of that decision-making authority. So it's not, everything won't stay as it is on the 1st of July, but the real focus is on day one, on a safe landing for staff. I'm sure colleagues will appreciate this has been an uncertain time for CCG staff, but a safe landing for all staff in the new organisation, and making sure some of those kind of statutory duties of the CCG are clearly cited in terms of the new responsibilities of the leadership team and the new organisation, safeguarding and risk, on call, and so on and so on. And positively, every statement that comes out of Greater Manchester on this stuff talks very clearly about 3 levels of working. Talks about, GM wide working, that the new organisation, the opportunities of the wider partnership across GM. But it talks about locality working as well, each of 10 places. And it talks about neighbourhood working, 66 or 67 populations of 30 to 50,000 across Greater Manchester, which is kind of a default setting for the way in which health and care and indeed wider public services are beginning to create opportunities for frontline staff to know each other and work with each other differently and have a different understanding of the assets of communities. So, everything that we believe in terms of neighbourhood working, locality working, as well as the opportunity GM working, it continues to be recognised and reinforced. Next slide, Jeannie, thanks. So this, I think I've shown, oh, no, go back. Well, thanks. So this slide, I think I've shared with colleagues before. So this is kind of the revised partnership kind of architecture, and it looks complicated. So let's just really focus in on 3 big important bits of this system. There is a locality board. It's got senior leadership on it in Bury, from the council, from what is the CCG, what will be the NHS Greater Manchester, from primary care networks, from for the voluntary sector, from Healthwatch, and from other key partners. And it will have an accountability, a responsibility, not only to the council, because the council delegate authority to it, but also to NHS Greater Manchester. So a focal point for strategy, outcomes, population health, and a responsibility to assure the system. The second bit is the Integrated Delivery Board. Catherine Jones is joining us. Kath provides the leadership of the Integrated Delivery Board. That's the engine room of the locality. That's where all of the opportunities to drive the ways in which we want services to operate through, for example, urgent care and elective care, adult social care and learning disability services and mental health and so on and so on. Just creating a space for leadership across all organisations, including primary care, through primary care networks and with neighbourhood colleagues, to really take forward our joint work together, integrated delivery, clues in the title. And the third bit of it is we're really keen, and I think I've shared this before, really keen to make sure that we've got opportunities for clinical and professional leadership in the borough. So we have established, and Kira has been chairing a borough-wide clinical and professional senate, and that's been really, really helpful in bringing together clinical and professional leaders from across the whole system, and it's maturing, it's developing. And we also agree through this forum and other forums establishing a Bury GP collaborative, a voice of GP leadership, reflective of what was the CCG, what will be the ICB, reflective of primary care networks, reflective of with the LMC, the GP Federation and other colleagues. So a kind of a single voice for GP leadership to influence, guide and lead the system. Next slide, Jeannie, thanks. There's lots of other bits of that kind of architecture, but they're the 3 main bits to really kind of hold on to and think about. So what does all that mean in Bury? Well, as I said, nearly all CCG staff in Bury will transfer to the new organisation, but they'll continue to work in Bury. We wave with grateful thanks goodbye to the non-executive leadership of the CCG on the 30th of June. So David McCann, Chris Wild and other colleagues who have provided sterling service throughout the life of the CCG. There will be a place-based leadership budget that's given to us by NHS Greater Manchester, and that will be able to sustain some capacity because of the focus on locality working. So some continuation of some clinical director capacity from the CCG, Kathy and Howard. We will be able to retain most of the CCG clinical leadership roles in the CCG around cancer and learning disabilities and so on. Really good to retain that and keep that. Most of those people on permanent basis move across to the new organisation on a permanent basis. We also retain some of the executive leadership of the CCG, and as funded by that place-based leadership budget. So Jeff Little, as the accountable officer of the CCG, becomes, to use the term at the moment, the place-based lead. I myself might have the opportunity of being a deputy, a place-based lead, and Sam Evans provides the opportunity, provides the financial leadership across the council, as well as the CCG, or what will become NHS GM, and we're able to stretch that place-based leadership budget because all of us have joint roles across the NHS, the CCG, and the council, which is helpful. So it's a pretty lean, efficient architecture for the CCG, and it's allowed us to retain some of the capacity and the clinical leadership capacity that we've got. We have worked together, that notion of one commissioning organisation, so the council and the CCG working closely together, and some joint staff working in joint teams, and also the local care organisation really worked hard to come together to blur those boundaries, just operating as a single team, as part of a single system. And that single system includes not just council and what was CCG, but of course all partners in primary care and Pennine Care, NCA, hospital, etc., and so on. And so we're calling that whole thing the Bury Integrated Care Partnership, and every part of Greater Manchester will call itself the same thing. And that term is just intended to describe the kind of the joint endeavour of the whole system trying to work together in a different way. Thanks, Jeannie. And so just a little bit more detail on the system clinical leadership capacity in Bury. So as I said, we developed the Clinical and Professional Senate, which is great. We've and that's maturing and developing. We've also had 2 or 3 meetings now of a GP collaborative, and that group needs to mature a little bit further and be a really fixed point in the system. But it's good that it's got going, and the GP Federation have done great to help us lead that. That's really positive. Obviously, we've got primary care network clinical leadership, and making sure that we've got opportunities for PCN leadership to influence all of the system. And we've got the role of neighbourhood clinical directors and leading the next stage of neighbourhood working, not only in health and care, but connected to wider public services. We've made sure that this locality board, if you remember, the kind of the strategic focus of the system it continues to be at least jointly led by a GP with the leader of the council. I think that's a really important connection. And we'll make sure that, and as I said, we've made sure that most of the CCG clinical lead roles are part of the lift and shift of CCG staff. So we'll continue for most colleagues to be able to benefit from their guidance and leadership in the system on the kind of the thematic themes that they lead on. Sorry, thematic themes, that's terrible, I apologise. The thematic arrangements in the system. We expect, as indicated, that the place-based leadership budget will allow senior clinical leadership and the 2 clinical directors of the CCG, Kathy and Howard, in the interim to provide to continue with that support. And we will have a place-based clinical lead role, and I'll explain more on that in a moment. And of course, we have the enormous benefit of Kieran's leadership as medical director of what was the local care organisation through the GP Federation as well. Probably important to say that we think it's not just about clinical leadership from within what was the CCG. I think it's about clinical and professional leadership across the whole organisation and the whole system. And maybe more work for us all to do in strengthening the primary secondary care interface and really supporting colleagues in secondary care and elsewhere in the system to have a whole system, a kind of a whole pathway view. And of course, we've got expert clinical nursing leadership in the CCG through Catherine Jackson, and Catherine's role is also subject to the lift and shift arrangements. So worked very hard to make sure that we retain the opportunities of system clinical leadership in Bury as part of the architecture I've just described. Next slide, Jeannie. But I think there is something about making sure, as has been the case with the CCG, that senior system clinical leadership roles have a mandate, have an authority, and you know, in some circumstances, you know, if people are there to represent GP leadership, then that kind of election or mandating process feels really important. And I think in that space, there's two really important clinical leadership roles, working closely with Kathy and Kieran and other colleagues to describe this. I think there's a strategic clinical leadership role as part of the place, working closely with Jeff as the place-based lead, connecting to Dr. Kumar and the NHS GM, co-chairing the locality board with the council leader. And we also think there's a sort of a place-based clinical leadership role, chairing the clinical and professional senate, providing the clinical leadership support to clinical leads in the system, working with the integrated delivery board, you know, the bit that's the engine room of the system. And so it's really, I think, important that we further develop and invest in the GP collaborative and indeed the clinical and professional senate, so that it's got a level of maturity to be able to provide that mandated representation, to provide a framework of election of senior leadership. And I think it's got some way to go, and I would really encourage colleagues to connect to and support the work of the GP collaborative, because that will be the place, I think, where we can make sure that there is representative clinical leadership or GP leadership across the system. But very happily, because of the work we've done, we've got the opportunity with Kathy and also with Kieran to be able to kind of adopt those roles in the interim, at least in the interim period, until such time as we're in the position to confirm that kind of electoral process through the GP collaborative. Next slide, Jeannie, thanks. So just kind of, I think this final slide, just to remind us that you know, there is a lot to do, isn't there? But we've worked quite hard also in trying to simplify the partnership system that we've got. So you know, when it comes down to it, we've got a locality board, we've got an integrated delivery board, and then we've got some really key priorities around urgent care, electric care, mental health, and so on. So we've got some big strategic boards that worry about that and think about that and drive a programme of work. We've got a lot to do around community and neighbourhood working, and I think Kieran may wish to say a word on that. Wrapping services around primary care, the sustainability of primary care, community services, adult social care, and other pathways around frailty and so on. We've got a lot of work to do to capitalise on the opportunity of digital and workforce. We know roughly what the system, the characteristics of the new system, and we know that we've got a big challenge, both financial sustainability and in terms of outcomes. So probably more in time as a system through the Clinical and Professional Senate and through the GP collaborative about taking forward and making sure all of those key priorities have got a clear focal point, clear leadership, clear programmes of work, and can be connected to and accountable to primary care colleagues. So I think just a summary slide then, Jeannie, thanks. So largely the CCG staff that you work with will still be here, and we're blessed with having great staff in lots of departments. The exec leads you work with will still be here. The senior clinical leadership will still be here. The thematic clinical leads, cancer and learning disabilities and so on, will still be here. We continue to work and develop our thinking about neighbourhood team working and PCN development and the connection between the two. We really want the Clinical Professional Senate and the GP collaborative to be mature if they're going to have the capacity to provide the kind of elected representation of GPs into the system in the way that the CCG has afforded an opportunity to do. We've secured kind of interim, very senior clinical leadership roles to make sure that we've covered the transition and that we're getting the new system off on the right foot. And in fairness, we've been operating large parts of this system in shadow form now for 6 months or so. The locality board has met in shadow form since November, actually. So we're in good shape, and And next point, we are recognisably as a Bury system in good shape, and there is a kind of a test of readiness by GM colleagues, and it was very good at the locality board meeting on Monday to hear that GM colleagues thought, you know, we're roughly in the right place, we're doing the right, we've got the right architecture. And just a final word, this is a really important moment, as the chair says, because the CCG and very many people as part of the CCG and you as members of the CCG have provided such really important service and work, and we should pause and reflect and recognise that. And so a number of CCG staff coming together on the morning of the 29th. I appreciate that's a morning, as I may not be perfect for primary care, but just a kind of a small and informal event, just to recognise the work actually over the past few years since 2013, and so you'd be very welcome to join us, and I hope that invitation has reached you. I think that's all I had to say, Kathy. I hope that's a helpful overview of where we've been and the confidence as where we're going.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really welcome overview, but I'm really aware that obviously we have been living and breathing this transition for several months now, and many colleagues who are listening today may not have been so clear about how things were changing. So I think what I'd say is, if anyone's got any questions or comments, then please do feel free to make them now. Or the other alternative is, you know, if you mull over anything or you think there's questions that you would like to ask, then I'm totally happy for anyone to email me, and we will definitely be able to respond to you, because I think sometimes you need to reflect on what you've heard a little bit before you can even formulate any questions. So that's also an option. But as things come to you over the next 20 minutes or so, you might want to just pop something into the chat. But thanks, Will. I think that's really helpful. Well, Anne.
Hi, Kathy. Hi, Will. Just to say, I think the presentation was amazing. I think you've done a fantastic piece of work, all of you, to get to where you've got, and no messy slides today, which is amazing. I can actually read them all, understand them. I think you've done a great piece of work to get to where you are. But my question will be based around what Kathy is saying. You've lived and breathed this for 2 years, and some of us have been on the edges, a bit more involved than others perhaps. So what's your key priorities initially, and what, if anything, have you got up your sleeve as quick wins for Bury to make sure that practices feel engaged, be part of, and to enable them to build confidence at working with such a big organisation? That's it. Thank you.
So I can start off that answer, I think, and then colleagues chip in. So I would say, Anne, the engaged bit is absolutely critical. I absolutely 100% agree with you. And I think that for me, the engagement is going to be really the role of the GP collaborative. I think that is what we've set it up to do, partly is to make sure that every practice, every GP, every practice nurse, every receptionist has got the ability to feed their views into the system and to inform the system of their experiences and their thoughts. So I think the GP collaborative's got a massive responsibility to do that. I think and hopefully that will be a two-way dialogue. I mean, I think that we can obviously work towards doing that, but obviously we would be really hopeful that neighbourhood working as it goes forward will engage practices. We will feel much more like a system, and I'm hopeful, and I might be wrong, but I'm hopeful that the way that we've been working over the whole pandemic, these 2 weekly webinars that we've been having have in some way allowed people to feel part of the community of Bury, and able to engage even remotely with colleagues across the system. So I'm hopeful that is the start of a way forward. And obviously, but everything's evolving, iterative. We can change things, we can improve things, and I think we'll just be informed by colleagues going forward. So that would be my response to the engagement and people feeling connected. With regard to what we're hoping for, well, basically our main aim right this minute is a safe landing on the 1st of July for absolutely everything. And there are, although I think in Bury there has been a fantastic coming together of all colleagues, I think we're in a great place. There are still some unanswered questions. There are some gaps still, and we do need to be really mindful of those as a system. So that would be probably my number one priority, and mostly I'm thinking around the workforce. You know, obviously all my CCG colleagues, this has been an incredibly, you know, anxiety producing time for them. What they've all been working super hard, many of them isolated in their homes, you know, throughout the COVID pandemic, and also not really understanding where they might land on the 1st of July. I hope that most of them are now feeling reasonably confident that, you know, as we've said, very little will look different. Well, I think nothing will look different on the 1st of July. But, you know, over the next year, things will transition and change. So with regard to quick wins, I think I might leave that for other colleagues to answer. I'm not sure that I can answer that one particularly at the moment, but does anyone else have any views about the engagement? Oh, Kieran. On mute.
Sorry, I'll come back on the quick wins. I might offer some options.
Will?
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Anne. Really appreciate that. I had in my head when I was doing these slides your challenge about trying to keep them as simple as possible. So I really appreciate your kind words. That's kind. I only wanted just to agree with Kathy. Actually, I think job one is around safe landing for the staff and some processes. But I think in terms of quick wins and best practice, I mean, tell us, tell us. You know your services better than anyone else, and it would be really good to hear what that would look like. And we need to make the kind of the machine that we've built work that in a way that addresses the concerns of frontline services, including practices and others. So please let us know, tell us, engage with us, connect to the GP Collaborative, as Chair says. And hopefully we can move forward together. Because I also think, well, I'm very happy to write structure charts and so on. Actually, this is just about quality of personal relationships and working relationships as well, isn't it? And I think we've come a long way through the pandemic in burying that, but we can get better, and we need to continue to meet to keep opportunities of talking and engaging with each other and respecting the circumstances of all of our services. So please get involved and tell us. And that'd be really helpful. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Will. Kath.
Thanks. So I'm leading the work of the Integrated Delivery Collaborative, and obviously primary care is absolutely at the heart of that. I think in terms of some of the kind of quick routes to engagement will be through the neighbourhood teams and the neighbourhood team development. I think we've got some work to do to connect the neighbourhood teams more closely into primary care. But I think that will be kind of one of our key routes of engagement and understanding what are kind of concerns and opportunities within primary care through those neighbourhood structures.
Thanks, Kath. Kieran, did you want to come in now?
Yeah, so I'll build on the kind of neighbourhood stuff, because and in terms of the quick wins, we've been doing that process for the last 3 to 4 months. So each neighbourhood should have identified, and I know from the feedback we had yesterday at my neighbourhood delivery board, we are nearly there and should be able to kind of crystallise that over the next 2 weeks. So each locality, each neighbourhood, has come up with its own priorities. We've been very good in trying to restrict those number of asks down to as bare minimum as possible, and each one has kind of been able to pick something that they feel their population would benefit from, and really kind of in terms of the quick wins, that's really where I think we need to really fully engage with, and if the items we've picked are the ones that are causing us the greatest amount of issues in our neighbourhood, that should be the quick wins that provides us with some of the relief we want in terms of workload, frustrations around working across partners. So that's where I think the quick wins and the engagement in doing practical things will be at that neighbourhood level. We've also negotiated with the system in terms of making sure the funding flows in that way as well. And we've got in the bit I'm going to just identify the people who are in those clinical lead positions who will be asked to kind of expand on those themes and make sure we deliver across those themes as well. So I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks we can identify those quick wins for you, give you some detail behind it, and because they're kind of rooted through general practice, that they'll be achievable within the time frame we've got set out, and the arrangements we've all put in terms of the system, in terms of allowing funding to flow in that way, will hopefully mean that everything is a bit more coordinated than maybe it has been in the past.
Thanks, Kieran. I think just to go back to what Will said to colleagues, I think if you have some views or some ideas about anything that should happen, or what we might call quick wins, then I think that we would be really grateful to hear from you. I think what I was just reflecting now is how many colleagues sitting here now would know how to actually make that happen. And so I would say that, you know, part of good communication, you know, you need to know how to do that. So I would say anybody on the GP Collaborative you could make contact with, and that will feed in. So you know, all of you will know somebody on the GP Collaborative, I'm hoping, and you can always email me, you can email Kieran, or any of your PCN CDs, because they're all on the GP Collaborative. So there's many routes in, and I absolutely challenge all of us to say, well, we will know someone on the GP Collaborative, and that is how we will feed in. So with Anne's challenge around the slides, Kieran, I'm hoping that she's going to be approving of your slide, which might be a little bit more complex, but we'll see. We'll get a score at the end, Anne.
No. Okay, so Jeannie, thank you very much. So I was tasked with kind of coming back with a simplified diagram as it relates to general practice. So I think Will's covered quite a lot of this already. But what I'm also going to try and do for you is to identify how general practice is connected into those boards as well. So I'm going to give you some of those names. So there's a lot of detail on this, and it's almost be there as a reference point for you. So what I've drawn out from Will's diagram is the main boards that I think we need to be interacting with, and so if you look on the blue bit, which is the local NHS setup, which is now known as Bury Integrated Care Partnership, and Will's already identified some of the key boards that are there. So you've got the locality board, you've got the Integrated Delivery Collaborative, and then you've got a number of work streams underneath it, and some enabler workshops. And those are the kind of 4 things that I think general practice needs to be engaging with. What I've identified in red are people who from general practice or primary care who are already engaged in those processes. So picking up on what Kath said, if you have ideas of quick wins, I'm hoping what this slide tells you, if you keep it as a reference slide, are some of the people you can engage with to get those ideas across. The 2 roles highlighted in yellow are the ones that Will was talking about. So Kath's role in terms of strategic clinical lead, and my role as the professional clinical lead. They are temporary, and what we will do in the next few months is come back with a process of how we get the substantive posts involved in that. So we'll work on that through the GP Collaborative and through our partners in the locality to set out that process so we can get substantive people in post for that. But on a temporary basis, Kath and I have agreed to carry on doing that. So you've got a bit of continuity whilst we move into the new world. So at the moment, in the Integrated Neighbourhood Collaborative Board, you've got Victoria, who goes there as nominated by her PCN colleagues, and Mark, who goes there from the GP Federation point of view. So anything to do with Kath's work, if you need to get across anything about primary care, those are your 2 people that you connect in with. We've got a number of priority work stream. I think Kath and Will have already kind of spoken to you about some of those priority work stream. Those will change with time, but I think we've identified the 4 or 5 that are really important to us. And you've got a set of clinicians there who are engaged in various ways in those work streams. Some of them, they are the senior clinical leadership and in others, they are just the primary care representation in those work streams. And then you've got a whole series of enabling workshops. Now, one of the ones we think is really important to us is IT. And so we've got a GP lead involved in that work. But there are a number of other enablers which I think are really important going forward, things like workforce, estates. We would like to get more general practice input into those, but it may not be clinical input that we want in those. And that's something that the GP Collaborative will decide on as it goes forward. So what those arrows are things where the GP Collaborative will be trying to ascertain who is best to engage and how are they going to engage in those. So those names that you see are there right now, but we will go through a process of making sure that they are still the right people and they have the mandate and the authority to talk on behalf of primary care. And the feedback to the rest of the primary care would be through the GP Collaborative. And I've already Mark and I have already told you about the GP Collaborative, but again, what I've done when the slide is put down the names of the people who are involved in the GP Collaborative. Obviously, when we get to as it matures, what we promised you is that practices will have a direct route into the collaborative as we get more established, but we certainly have the PCN leads attending regularly. We have an LMC rep in the shape of FAS coming up there. I go on behalf of the Federation, and we've also made an offer for the neighbourhood CDs to come along as well. We recognise that they can't always come to every single meeting, but they will have a mechanism of feeding into the GP Collaborative. So we've drawn the GP leadership from as wide a representative as we can, and that GP Collaborative will then obviously try and collate the general practice view on things that are going to happen in the locality and feed into the other groups that we've identified for you. And above the locality, there's obviously a GM model as well. So NHS Greater Manchester, as it's going to be referred to, that's still maturing at the moment. The final architecture isn't in place, but quite significant bits of it are. So there will be a board, and that will have some strategic input, and localities will need to input into that strategic. And so that will come from the locality board, and as you can see, we will have general practice representation on that to feed into GM. Manisha Kumar, who's the medical director of NHS Greater Manchester, is creating a GM clinical senate, and the locality senates will be feeding into those. So she is coming to one of our locality senates in a couple of weeks' time to just talk to us about how that linkage is going to work between the locality one and the GM senate. So again, we have a mechanism of feeding in to those items that are going to be dealt with at the GM level. So each locality will have that say into that. And then we'll be probably already familiar with the fact that there is a GP board, or general practice board rather, and that already has a makeup of having 3 places for each locality, 1 from PCNs, 1 from LMC, and 1 from the Federation rep. So we've already got 3 people who identified who go and represent Barry on that board, and then that board, it feeds in as a primary care board into the ICS board. So those are the ways that general practice has been hardwired into both our locality and into the GM system. And this slide hopefully tells you about some of the people who will be charged with taking responsibility for that contribution in those boards. So I hope that gives you a flavour of where we're at the moment. The other thing that sits underneath this is, as Kath has said, that not a lot hopefully will change on the 1st of July, but over the next 3 months or so, what we want to do is to make sure you know who you need to connect into in terms of getting some of your questions answered. So we're also creating a management team that will sit as part of the GP Collaborative, and that will draw in all the people you are very familiar with, but they'll be working as one team, whereas at the moment we're obviously working in different parts of the primary care system and working differently. So we've got Zoe's team, the CCG team, who, although will be employed by GM Greater Manchester, are still going to be deployed locally. So they will be part of that management team. We will obviously contribute some people from the Federation, so Paul will be part of that team. The PCN managers, Stuart and Alison, who are helping the PCNs deliver against some of their stuff, will be part of that management team. And Ian, who helps the neighbourhood CEDs, again, will be asked to join that team as well. So you'll have one management team who's doing covering all aspects where general practice is being asked to do something. And hopefully what we can do, as we've demonstrated with the locally commissioned services, make sure where we're asking something, we can tick off as many boxes and make sure the whole thing is as well coordinated as possible. So we've not got lots of different asks coming from lots of different places. And the GP Collaborative really is the important place through the clinical representation and through the management team of making sure general practice is kept informed of what's happening at the locality, but also gives you a way of feeding into the system as well. So that's kind of, I hope, answers the question about simplifying what our responsibility is and who the people are. And as I said, as soon as we get the management structure underneath that, I will do a similar diagram for you to make sure you know how to connect into the right people for the right things over the next few months. So that's where we're at. I think the plea would be here that if this is the structure now, that we start using the structure and making sure that when we set out the processes for the mandate, it is really important that we make sure that these people who are representing us have the mandate, and that's where we need general practice to engage with the process. Okay, Kathy, that's it.
Thanks, Kieran. I think that is a really helpful diagram, and I think that we will pop all the slides onto SharePoint at the end of this so that people have got that as a reference point. Although obviously it's a moment in time, that slide, isn't it? But the structures will remain, and I think that's just a useful document for people to have. Does anyone have any questions for Kieran around any of the points that have been made so far? Because if not, I've got a question from Nagat, which I think only possibly Will might be able to answer. So Will, Nagat saying that she's read somewhere, so unspecified place, that NHSE have stipulated some LD input into the GM board. I'm assuming you mean the ICB, Nagat.
It was learning disability and autism. They've said, millions of people caught up with that there'll be somebody from a learning disability and autism background that will be on the. I was just wondering who that might be, but whether we've got any names yet.
Yeah, that rings a bell, Nagat. Thanks. I'm not sure I've got a name, but I'll track it down because we need to know that. So thank you. I'll follow that up. Sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head. Thanks, Nagat.
Okay, thanks, Nagat. So if there aren't any further questions on this particular section, then we will move to the next, and possibly what most people will really want to know on day one. Zoe's going to tell us who's still knocking about and how do we get hold of them, and you know, any changes, if any, in how we interact with the primary care team.
Thanks, Kathy. Jeannie, do you want to go on to the next slide? Okay, so some of this is a duplication of what others have already said, so I do apologise for that. But obviously from day one, which we're classing as the 1st of July, as Will said, there shouldn't be physically any change. So anybody who you contact in our team will still be there, obviously. Lisa is about to go off on mat leave, and we do have a couple of new recruits that we're just waiting to recruit. But other than that, the primary care email address will still exist. We might have to change it, but as soon as we do, we'll communicate out what that change is. What is changing, though, is, next slide, sorry, Jeannie, is under the General Practice Leadership Collaborative. Obviously, part of their remit will be around the transformation of primary care. And that is a really sort of wide-reaching programme of work. And Kieran already alluded to a programme management team. So we're already working quite closely with the Federation around a number of different work projects at the moment and aligning our work programmes. So an example of that is the alignment of the PCN
targets along with the neighbourhood targets and the neighbourhood agreements and the work with public health. What we're trying to do is obviously streamline what we're asking practices to do, but do it as a wider group of people rather than it just be with general practice in total alone and as a standalone model. So we're also looking at the quality assured spirometry with the Federation. We're obviously undertaking the semi-structured interviews, which some of you have already fed back on, so thank you for that. And also the primary care general practices here for you campaign. So do you want to just go on to the next slide for the primary care? Yeah, so these are the slides that Carrie's obviously previously sent out onto SharePoint. If you haven't already looked at that resource, we do encourage you to look at them, retweet them, share them as much as possible. Our comms team will be in touch with you shortly to try and get these messages out as far and wide as we possibly can. This is the first iteration of the comms campaign that's there to help general practice. Our next step will be to sort of identify the wider primary care team and obviously the roles that they can actually help patients with, and we hope to make those a little bit more live by doing some videos. I think Kathy's already got a few victims lined up for that, so we'll be in touch to try and organise those.
They don't know who they are though, Zoe.
Oh,
some of them are on this call, so sit tight.
They'll be warned. Next slide, please, Jeannie. And so all of these resources are all available on SharePoint. I know we refer to it quite often, but just so that people actually know how to navigate to that. So you should all be members of a Bury Information Hub team. And under that team is a general tab. You literally just click the general tab. You will see all of the posted messages, which obviously some of the latest ones were around the Northern Care Alliance IT issues. So you'll see those on there. And the actual Bury SharePoint site is one of the tabs that's at the top of that chat. So you just literally click on it, and then you'll just see all of the various different resources that every time we do a webinar, they're all posted on there. Lisa's done a couple of sessions with practices. There's a helpful A to Z directory as well that you can go in there just to find things. And they've also now all introduced a weekly sort of archive so that the key messages can be archived. You can still go back to them, but any questions around access or how to navigate the system, just contact somebody in the primary care email address, or Lisa and Jeannie, more than happy to help you navigate that system. Next slide, please, Jeannie. Right, so lastly, obviously, we talked about our joint programme of work. We need to continue to do that. There's lots of other pieces of work that both the Federation and the CCG work on that are cross-cutting and we have a common interest in. So we are looking to adopt a standardised process to our programme management to be able to ensure that whatever we develop and design can actually feed the wider system, so that we're not just creating pieces of work that then have to be reproduced for different forums. And then that provides the collaborative also with the assurance that programmes of work are progressing as planned and can be reported to the IDC board as well. But obviously, key message, with the team is here. You've got any concerns, any issues, please do contact either the generic inbox or one of us directly. More than happy to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. And thank you to everyone who's spoken today. I hope colleagues are feeling a little bit more clear about how things might look in the new world of the 1st of July. And I think if there are any lingering concerns or queries, then please do get in touch with us, and we could hopefully sort any concerns out that you have. The SharePoint thing's really important. I think that we in primary care probably don't use Teams as much. In the CCG, we're just always on Teams. Teams is where we live now. So SharePoint's really easy for us to access, or it's sort of second nature. I'm not sure that it's quite the same for us as GPs or practice nurses or other members of the primary care team. So I think that if you are not so sure about SharePoint, or you're a bit nervous of using it, then we can definitely provide some more training and input on how to use it. It's an incredibly useful resource Lisa Lucas has just done the most amazing job, and absolutely everything you could possibly ever want to know is there, I think. So do let us know if that's something that you would appreciate, because we can definitely do that again. So I don't know how to sum up. It's a strange one, really. So obviously the CCG is entering its last few weeks, and really and truly it is only just a sort of a title and a sort of a strategic organisation that we're changing from one to another. We're all going to be the same people, the same practices, and the same system, and hopefully the new way of working will bring us even closer together. There are too many people to thank who have really worked incredibly hard for the CCG over the last 8-9 years. Obviously, every single practice has played its role and has been an active member of the CCG, and many of us as clinicians have had the opportunity to work within the CCG and in the infrastructure of the CCG. Obviously, our primary care team have been absolutely fabulous throughout, have always supported us, and they will continue to do that. So I would just say thank you to everybody, all of the practices, every single person that's been working in Bury over the last, sort of decade, who's really done such a fabulous job. And despite all the challenges that we've had as a population or as a CCG or as individual practices, everybody has continued to work and provide a fantastic service to the people of Bury. So I was going to say that you can't pick one person out. I'm not going to pick one person out to say anything other than there is one person who is leaving us from Bury for Pastures New, who's been involved, well, before I've been involved, and I was involved at the start. She predates that. I don't know how long she's been involved, but in my whole experience, Anne Stewart has provided a huge amount of energy, enthusiasm, knowledge, experience, and it's been unwavering throughout the entire time. So I would just like to say to Anne, thank you so much for all of your support and your energy over the last decade, and possibly before, probably before. And we wish you all the best in your new Pastures New, where you're going to be working from now on. So that is the end of our CCG membership engagement event, and the beginning of our NHS Bury Integrated Care Partnership strategic membership events. So look out for those in your diary, because we will be populating your diaries, of course we will, with webinars on a 2-weekly basis. So it's not the end at all. It's just a change. So thank you everyone for your attention today and for coming on what is an incredibly busy week, I know. And do please get in contact with us if there's anything further that you need to know or that's bothering you. So have a good afternoon, everyone. See you all very shortly. Take care.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks.